All right, so I'll get started here officially. Hi, welcome to Chi for Yourself. We are here to promote the higher energies, good chi, if you will, and to help you live your genuine life. And we're glad you're with us wherever you are in the world today. Our guest on this show is Brad Warner. Brad's a Zen priest, filmmaker, blogger, Japanese monster movie marketer, and author. He's written a book called There Is No God, and he is always with you, a search for God in odd places. The book looks at the God or no God question and lots of others. We'll cover some of those today. Not only do we welcome Brad Warner on Chi for Yourself, but we say congratulations for having been named by Huffington Post as one of the top Buddhists to follow on Twitter. Congratulations.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because until I was nominated in that category, it's something like the top 12 Buddhists on Twitter. I didn't know there were 12 Buddhists on Twitter. I thought there was, maybe there were only 12. So who knows?
Well, we'll look at, first of all, some of your early life. Obviously, you've worn a lot of hats, and you've been, I guess, accepted by the culture with a glamorous, exciting, cool life. You've done a lot of great things. Why would you want to write a book suddenly about God?
Because it's always been a subject of great interest to me. I did not grow up in a religious household, so I kind of encountered the concept of God in a way I don't know that I think it's a little bit unusual because there was no indoctrination into it. So I kind of came at it fresh when I was a kid and was very interested. You know, who are these people? Why do they believe in God? What is God? And I kept this kind of fascination up with it. I always kept, I wasn't convinced by most of the religions that I encountered, that they didn't seem to have any better idea than anybody else about the subject, even though they claimed to, and they would always have a book they could refer to. But really, when you examined it a little bit closer, they didn't know anything any more than anybody else. But I encountered Zen practice, which is usually described in sort of introductory Zen literature as being variously a religion without God or a philosophy without God. And I thought that was interesting enough to warrant a look. But my conclusion after going through it for many decades is it's not exactly a religion without God. There is God does play a part in it, or something plays a part in it. The same something that other religions have called God, which means you have to kind of look at that definition of the word and see exactly what people mean when they say it, because it has a lot of meanings.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're from Ohio originally. I'm from Pennsylvania, near the Ohio border. Not exactly hotbeds of contemplative life. Do those areas, I don't know, instill something that causes you at a certain point to kind of change directions and question that so-called wholesome living?
The upbringing in Ohio?
Yeah. I mean, does
I don't know.
Does that cause you to, I mean, is it almost automatic that you're going to stop and question that because it seems so idyllic sometimes, in the Midwest?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, I had a kind of a weird upbringing where that's concerned, because I grew up the first 7 years of my life in Wadsworth, Ohio, which is exactly the kind of town that the name implies it is. And then moved when I was 7. My dad accepted a position in Nairobi, Kenya. So we packed up the family and moved to Africa for the next almost 4 years. Mm. So, and then we moved back to the same town in Ohio. So it was very, it was this kind of weird introduction into a whole other type of existence, which had I stayed in Ohio, I would never have even assumed was available. So I had that behind me, and that also gave me a little bit of an introduction to other concepts of God. You know, when I first heard of God, it was the God of, you know, honestly, mainstream Protestant Christianity, and then to be in Africa and to be among, you know, contrary to what a lot of people are saying these days, Kenya is not a Muslim country, but it does have a significant Muslim minority and a significant Hindu minority and even a few Buddhists. So to be introduced to that, it was fascinating to see that, oh, okay, there's all kinds of ideas about God out there, and a lot of them are so strange, at least, you know, in terms of my upbringing, that they seem almost incomprehensible. So I think that just added to it, that contrast.
And the promotional material for There Is No God includes the well-known quote from Suzuki: "Zen has no God to worship, no ceremonial rites to observe, no future abode to which the dead are destined." Is skepticism just kind of built into Buddhism? It almost seems pessimistic.
Well, yeah, I think it is, and there's a huge amount, I don't know if that's the word I want, of things that fall into the heading Buddhism. So if I talk about the Buddhism that I studied, you know, it may be quite different from the other Buddhisms out there, but at least in the Zen lineage, there's a tremendous amount of skepticism, which we in the Zen lineage trace all the way back to the historical Buddha, and I think that's reasonable to do so, because if you look at the sutras, he does express the same kind of attitude, which is that he's not accepting of any sort of dogma, and he does not ever attempt to establish his own dogma. He leaves it up to each of his students to discover for him or herself their own truth, which he does make this kind of remarkable claim that if they do discover the truth, it will be in its own way both identical to the truth he discovered and also completely different, in that it will be expressed through a different personality and a different set of circumstances. So it was very interesting in that it allowed for doubt. You know, every other religion I had encountered emphasized faith as the thing, and you had to kind of fall backwards into this acceptance of whatever you were told. Whereas the Zen style of Buddhism says just the opposite. It says don't accept what you're told. And Buddha himself is famous for having said that. He said don't accept any dogma, including my dogma. You need to see the truth for yourself, and I just think that was a brilliant thing.
Mm-hmm. The word God is so highly charged anymore, I tend to avoid using it in my conversation, but I talk to people who often bring up Buddhism, and they see it as godless, and they feel that Buddhists worship Buddha. Where does Buddha fit in all of this? That would make sense to Christians who see the God and the prophet and the Trinity and all of that. What is Buddha's place in Buddhism?
Right. Well, Buddha's place in Buddhism, I have likened to sort of Einstein's place in physics. You know, he was a person who was a brilliant, a kind of a genius in his own way, and he created this system of meditation, which others have followed. But he wasn't a prophet. He didn't claim to have revealed anything or have any special connection. He didn't even really claim that the system of meditation was his own invention. He sort of, if anything, he would say that he discovered it. You know, that it was something that was always available to anybody who wanted to try, and he just kind of discovered it. So his position is like that, and there isn't this idea that Buddhism is frozen at the point of Buddha's entry and exit from this world. So, whereas in most forms, but not all, most forms of Christianity have the idea that Jesus said it and he brought forth a revelation, and then once Jesus had departed, you know, to heaven, then it was over. Then anything that comes later is not, can't be authoritative. Whereas Buddha never claimed any such thing, so Buddhism continues to develop in ways that I think are mostly true to the founders' intent, but it's allowed to change, which is something else that made it very attractive to me.
Mm-hmm. And if you can have a God in this context, then I guess you don't have to have what's commonly called worship, since there's so many doors are left open.
Yeah, I would say the idea of worshiping God was one of these things that always hung me up. And comedians, what's his name? George Carlin was really good at pointing out the kind of absurdity of worshiping God, because if God is all powerful, why would he care whether we told him so all the time? That kind of thing always seemed kind of weird to me. So I don't think there's any need to worship God. That it's not. I feel that God is both a good word for what we do in this practice and a completely terrible word, and I like that dichotomy, that it seems to be both, because if you say, it's kind of what the title is about, if you say there is no God, then you are closing the door on something that I think may be real and significant and important. But if, on the other hand, you say there's a God and he has this shoe size and he enjoys this sort of food and he wants you to call him this name and not that name, then you're also going in a wrong direction. So I feel that in some way you have to find a way to embrace all of these contradictory aspects of the problem.
Alan Watts was quoted as saying, "Buddhists are debunkers." Would you go along with that, or Buddhists kind of trying to shoot holes in some of these ideas?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of that. I was just telling somebody the other day about how I feel that a lot of what my work is as a Buddhist teacher is to constantly tell people, no, that's not it. No, that's not it.
Mm-hmm.
So people will, a student of Buddhism will be working on this meditation practice, and often there are times when you think, oh, I've got it, I've figured it out now. And then the duty of the teacher is to say, no, you haven't figured it out, because you can't figure it out. There's no final conclusion. It's always an ongoing thing, and I think in general Buddhists will do that to just about anything. I find myself often being a bit of devil's advocate. Whatever somebody says, I'll go, well, yeah, but there's another side to it. And I feel like maybe my job in life is to always point out that there's another side to any argument or any conclusion you can come to.
Yeah. And of course, no one corners the market in truth this way, and in that way doesn't plant the Buddhist flag, let's say, in the name of, and hit people over the head with weapons and say, we have the truth, so you better follow along. That seems, it just seems like a safe and sane discipline.
Yeah, well, I think so. It's a very weird thing when you think about it, but I can understand the historical roots of it. I mean, my supposition is that at one time religion was indistinguishable from the idea of moral order. So the only people who were concerned with being moral were those who subscribed to the religion. I'm talking in terms of primitive man. And so anyone who said they were an atheist or a non-believer was actually dangerous to society. It would be like saying, I'm a non-believer in the police, and you don't want too many of those people running around, and the society will naturally try to defend itself against people who who want to disrupt society. But I think we've also changed dramatically since those times, and yet those attitudes still hold. So I think a lot of the things that happen, even terrible tragedies like the September 11th, 2001, are the result of people confusedly thinking, "Oh my God, these people are a danger to us, to the society of mankind, and we have to put a stop to them because they're not obeying the rules."
Right.
Whereas we need to find a way to transcend that sort of the idea that morality, it comes about because God might punish you if you're not moral. Well, not enough people believe that for it to be a powerful argument anymore, and so we have to find a new basis for morality.
Your book is subtitled "The Search for God in Odd Places." Why odd places?
Well, I've been traveling around the world for the past 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer than that, because once I started writing books, I started getting invitations to come and talk about them, and so I've traveled a lot. And one of the most interesting odd places I traveled to see about God is Jerusalem, and I wrote about that in the book, and seeing what, because I feel like, although I wouldn't call myself a Christian, I am really interested in Christianity, and I have been since I was a kid, and the roots of Christianity and who was Jesus and all this stuff. So it was very instructive to go to Jerusalem, and before that, I spent a week in Belfast, Northern Ireland, which was a great lesson in seeing two cities that are extremely divided along religious lines. So in Jerusalem, it's the Muslims and the Jews, and in Belfast, it's the Catholics and the Protestants, and they're both, the Muslim and Jewish religion are extremely similar, and then you go to Protestant and Catholic, and to me, who's not schooled in either side, they seem almost indistinguishable. Like, I can't tell the Church of England from the Catholic Church at all. If if you just sat me down in one, I don't think I would be able to tell you what it was, because they're so similar. And yet, people have used these very minute divisions in religion to just as an excuse for venting all sorts of other frustrations which have nothing to do with God and nothing to do with religion. Yet religion seems to be a nice little focal point or something. Something you can kind of go, well, you're a Catholic and I'm a Protestant, and therefore, and then rattle on all your differences. It's so searching for God in odd places like that, places that some people think are holy, like Jerusalem, or places that people don't think are holy at all, like Akron, Ohio. I was kind of writing about that in the book because as I was finishing the book, I had moved back to Akron, Ohio, where I grew up, and seeing that there was kind of holiness even to that city, that it was just as holy as Jerusalem in its own way. Nobody knows it.
A friend of my family is a native of Thailand, and she's what I would call, I guess for lack of a better word, a devout Buddhist. But instead of worship, she seems to have honor of family, honor of ancestors, tradition, creation. It seems that honor and respect are important in Buddhist living. Is that something that ranks highly, or is that also a take it or leave it?
No, I think honor and is very important, and it's probably more important than any sort of worshipful attitude. You have respect for everything. I mean, this is highly emphasized. It's almost, sometimes Buddhism will almost sound like the Native American religions in that it reveres everything. They count rocks and stones and fences fences, pebbles, tiles, and walls. There's a thing that comes up in Dogen, who's a writer, whose stuff I really like, and he uses that formula over and over again in his writing to emphasize the idea of having respect for all things, including things that are normally considered as mundane and ordinary. So you not only is there a very strong emphasis on honoring your family and these kind of obvious things, but there's also an emphasis on honoring ordinary things that we usually don't think of as warranting any sort of respect or even notice. Yet we try to revere even these things.
I want to touch on a few of the, I guess, what I'll call the what about questions. What about love? What might we be comforted by with the idea of a supreme being, or that a supreme being loves us? Do we need to work on that too?
Well, yeah, I quote my first teacher somewhere near the end of the book saying that within Buddhist practice, a natural love for all things develops. And he was a guy, was and still is, a guy who is comfortable with that language. One of the interesting things about the Zen lineage, though, is it tends to avoid words with a high degree of emotional impact, like love, because of their associations with emotionalism. But I think it's proper to talk in terms of love in the same way as it's proper, I think, in some context to talk in terms of God, because both God and love are ultimately kind of unknowable. We don't really know what love is. We can't quantify it. We can't. We all know that it exists, and we all know when we feel it and when we experience it. But at the same time, if you were to try to describe it, you can't describe it. It resists description. So we have a name, we have a word for it, and the word is love. I think the Beatles said that, right? But we don't know what it is. So I think this is important. It's a sort of a love, maybe ultimately a kind of a binding force that holds the whole universe together, might be the same force that we experience in our subjective life as love. And I think that's a weird idea. I think physics is a long way from accepting that sort of idea, but I would speculate, I'm probably on shaky ground to speculate like this, but I would speculate that at some point in our understanding of science and physics, people will start to understand this. They'll start to say, oh my God, this this binding force of the universe that we've been searching for, we also experience that as an emotion, which just sounds like I'm taking a hit of acid and I'm just talking out of my butt, but I don't think so. I think there's I really do believe there's something to that idea.
Publishers Weekly refers to your work as punk iconoclasm. Do you like the Maverick label, or any label for that matter?
Well, people will say what they say, and it's useful in terms of marketing and whatever to do that. I always feel like I don't know. I came out of the punk rock milieu or whatever it is. I was in punk rock bands, and the band I used to be in reformed a few years ago, so I'm back in it again, back playing punk rock. But and so that's part of my background. But I always feel like I'm not really out there trying to tear anything down necessarily. Well, maybe some things, but not so much as trying to look at it, to say, okay, well, you're going to tell me this thing. You'll make this blanket statement. God created the universe or whatever, and I'll say, well, what do you mean by God? What do you mean by created? And what do you mean by the universe? Let's talk about that. If you're going to make a statement like that, well, let's find out what that means.
One more what about, if we're talking love, what about sex? Taboos, wide open, Where do we go in the Buddhist sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that's my book before this one was called Sex, Sin, and Zen, and it's really, in a lot of ways, it's about a lot of things, but partly about, well, I mean, mostly, I suppose, because that's the title, about sex in Buddhist terms, and I think that's quite interesting too, because Buddhism has had an interesting relationship with sexuality. There's a Buddhist precept which is common to all lineages of Buddhism, which says, "Do not misuse sex." It's, one of the 10 or 5, depending on which sect of Buddhism you're joining, cardinal rules of Buddhist practice is do not misuse sex. So there's an understanding that sex is an area which can be misused, but at the same time, within the Zen lineage, that's the only specific rule about sex. There are older lineages in Buddhism which detail for practitioners what the misuse of sex is in terms of the religion. In the Zen lineage, it was kind of decided a few hundred years ago that all of those rules, with a few very obvious exceptions, could be broken if everyone involved in the act was okay with it. It doesn't become a violation of misusing sexuality. Of course, there are kinds of sex, like sex with children or something, where you can't possibly have both parties being in agreement with it because one party is incapable of doing so. But if we, or rape or something like that, but if we leave those out, those really obvious ones, there's a huge area in which you can do, pretty much anything as long as everybody's okay with it. But you have to realize that any time you engage with another human being at that level, you are you're opening yourself up to all sorts of potentials for problem and harm and misuse, and that means you have to be extraordinarily careful when you engage that way, and I think that's the main lesson that we try to impart in Buddhist practice when it comes to sex. Just be very careful what you're doing.
You have you find yourself in some agreement with some noteworthy atheists, and yet we're talking about God and the existence of God, and also the non-existence of God. Can you be both atheist and a believer in God?
I think so, and I think that's. I think it sounds like a contradiction, but I don't think it is. There was this interesting thing as time goes on. It becomes a little bit more interesting. During the time I was writing the book, there was all this chatter on the internet that people kept forwarding to me about Sam Harris, who's a very well-known and influential, and I think quite intelligent and interesting atheist, and he was going on and doing interviews where he was saying, I believe in God, and I'm writing this book about my belief in God, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting, and so I included some of that in the book. What's happened since then is it seems like Sam Harris has gone underground with this, because he's not talking about it anymore, at least as far as I can tell. And maybe it's because I can imagine, given the kind of reaction my book has created, that if you were Sam Harris, you would get an incredible amount of probably quite nasty reaction to this idea that you could be an atheist and believe in God at the same time, because it seems so absolutely contradictory. But I don't think it is, because in some ways I agree with most of the ideas of atheists. I don't think there's a supernatural being who created all of this at some 6,000 years ago and made Noah's Ark and whatever. I don't believe in supernatural beings or intervention from outside the universe. Yet I don't think that. I think the word God can mean a lot of things besides that. I do believe strongly that there's an ultimate ground to all of this, to the ground of all being and non-being is how my first teacher would put it, and that ground includes us. It's not, I saw some atheist, I wish I could remember who it was, just the other day saying the universe doesn't care about us. It's completely indifferent to us. And I think in some sense that's true, in the sense of there's no divine supernatural being out there tallying up our rights and wrongs. But at the same time, I feel like we are absolute expressions of the universe in the same way everything is. I'm sitting in my front porch looking at all these pebbles, that line the walkway, and each of these pebbles is also an expression of the complete universe. It doesn't stand alone by itself. These pebbles, were forged in stars, the 10 bazillion years ago or whatever it is, and now they're here, and I walk on them, and I don't think anything of them, but they're very significant, and every element in our bodies has been around since the beginning of time. And I would go on to say, and this is where a lot of people would take issue with it, that every element of our psyche has also been around since the beginning of time. And before, if you can talk in such terms, but it's infinite. So what we are is expressions of the infinite, and we can have some connection to that.
One last question, and we'll let you get on your way. I would like to see more dialogue on the topic of God, the existence of God, and some sort of coexistence among beliefs, and I think There Is No God offers a lot of food for thought in that direction, but we're inundated with predictions of end times, climatic destruction, nuclear annihilation, not to mention cancellation of our favorite reality TV shows. In this noisy atmosphere, what do you want readers and followers to take away from your work?
Well, it's funny. I've thought a lot about that question because people keep asking it, and I never really considered it in those terms as I was writing. But I think, in retrospect, I feel like it's not. I feel like a lot of the popular culture presents these issues in terms of sort of black and white, on, off, yes or no questions. Either there's a God and you believe in Him and you worship Him and you go to church on Sunday and do this and that, or you don't believe in God and everything is hopeless and life is just meaninglessness and we live for a while and we die and nothing happens. And I don't think the options are that limited. I think there are ways. There's a middle ground, a very vast middle ground, in which you can exist and take comfort and have your beliefs, but also understand that your beliefs are just beliefs. They have a usefulness and maybe even a reality that we can point to, but they're not absolute. But that doesn't mean we have to throw them away. We just have to say, okay, here's my beliefs. They're not absolute. Let's go.